What's the password? Welcome to the Game Master Speakeasy. Brought to you by the record button.
Howdy, and welcome to the Game Master Speakeasy. Welcome. Come on in out of the rain. Come on out of the rain, saddle up to the bar. Today's bartender is named Nero, and Nero can serve you, if you are of the appropriate age, an alcoholic beverage, because this is a speakeasy. Specifically, the Game Master Speakeasy, where a couple of game masters like to hang out and chit-chat about our favorite pastime, tabletop role-playing games. I am but one of your hosts, Cody.
And I'm Lance.
Lance, how's your day going?
My day's going pretty well. I've got a good beer in front of me. It's delicious.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a little bit.
Absolutely.
I really like this. I've
more.
got FOMO about this beer.
I'm gonna have to get some more of it.
Yeah, well, as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna go take some home because this is really good.
Absolutely.
But that said, for those of you that are just joining us, what is this, episode 14, I think? For those of you who are starting with episode 14 somehow, we are a couple of dudes from the Midwest who like to play tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Traveler, Call of Cthulhu, things like that, where we roll dice and make-believe. And it's a lot of fun, because what else are you going to do when you're landlocked?
That's true. Got no beach.
We've got a couple things in news. We're going to talk about the beer, and today's open segment, I want to talk about structuring quests and how you do that in a couple of different genres.
All right.
But before we get there, the couple pieces of news I have, we're going to start with something that I forgot to talk about last episode, which this is a big deal for some people. I have never read the novels, but there is a series of Dungeons and Dragons novels called Dragonlance. Have you ever heard this word before?
I have heard of it, yes. I've never read it.
Okay, so Dragonlance, this is a series of Dungeons and Dragons novels, very famous among the D&D community. I'll pretty much, I don't know, based on I've read the intro for the Dark Elf trilogy for Dritz, but I have never read any Dragonlance, and when people talk about them, I'd say it's like about equivalent hype levels from people that are grognards. Grognards being like, you know, people that have been around for a really long time and are set in their ways in terms of RPGs. But Dragonlance is a setting, so much like how Forgotten Realms is where the Dark Elf trilogy take place, Dragonlance is its own setting.
See, and I think that's why I've heard of it. Less about the novels, but I've heard about the setting.
Yeah, it's one of the D&D settings, because I think there's, 5 big ones that I can name off the top of my head. We've only ever played in the Forgotten Realms, but there's also Dragonlance, there's Dark Sun, there's Eberron, and there's Greyhawk. How many was that?
I think 4.
Yeah, okay. Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Dark Sun, Eberron, Greyhawk. There you go. 5.
Okay, 5.
I named 5. I think that's the big 5 right there. Those are the big 5 settings for Dungeons and Dragons, and they all have their different idiosyncrasies, whether it be, this is how magic works in this one, or these are the different types of ancestries. There's an infamous race of small beings called Kender, which exist in the Dragonlance setting. Anyway, I digress. Those of you who are big fans of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition are probably familiar with something called Unearthed Arcana, which is essentially a beta test of future content.
I always love that stuff.
Wizards of the Coast, much like how Paizo does public play tests, they put out information ahead of time, and people can take a survey and provide feedback on what they do and don't like about it. And it's almost always things that they will probably include in a future book. And they have put out an Unearthed Arcana, which I forgot to mention this last episode, pretty much just in regards to Dragonlance stuff. So that aforementioned ancestry, the Kender, rules for playing Kender player characters are included, among other things, so that you can start to get a feel on how a Dragonlance setting will behave in 5th edition. And anyone who is experienced in this can correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong about this, but I think there actually is, whether it be, I don't know if it's AD&D or D&D 3.5 or whatever, but I think there's a point where Dragonlance as a setting is kind of also an adventure module, where unlike most games, you play as the characters in the novels.
Oh, okay.
Like I want to say, and I'm gonna hedge my bets here and say I've never done an actual research into this, but I've always been given the impression from what I've read about it that you're kind of like there is an option for playing in that setting where you're playing through the novels.
That's interesting.
Yeah, where the characters have kind of like pre-gens, I want to say, or at least there's a version of that out there somewhere.
See, that's not.
I think that the upcoming Cowboy Bebop game is also like that, where they're going to have stats for the players to play as Spike and Jet and Faye.
That's that's
And Ed.
kind of what Pinnacle did with the dime novels for Deadlands. Like each of those books.
I assume dime novels were like mini adventures.
Yeah, kind of. Well,
Okay.
like the Worms one we talked about a couple episodes ago
That's right, with Wormy.
was a dime novel, and basically what the dime novels are is the front half of it is actually a small short story. Basically, it's not like a whole novel. It is a short story of what that adventure entails, and it is usually played through by like the titular Deadlands character Ronan Lynch, the harrowed gunslinger. Sometimes Hank Ketchum.
Absolute badass
Yep.
Ronan Lynch.
And sometimes the Texas Ranger Hank Ketchum has a part in the whole thing.
I'm
but
sorry,
I mean,
that always gets me. That
Yeah.
there's a ranger, like a guy who would apprehend criminals, and his name's
Let's-
Hank Ketchum.
Yep.
Like he's Ash's uncle
yeah,
or
to say,
something.
no relation to the Pokemon dude. But like it, so as a game master, you'll read through the dime novels, and what I always do is after the players ran it, I would let them read the dime novels.
Oh, just to get all the
Not beforehand, because that would spoil the entire adventure, because
Right.
the back half of that book then, or the back third of it, depending on how much space they needed to make it a thing, was the actual adventure that dime novel had just been through.
That sounds a lot of fun. I might like.
If you want to borrow those, I've got
Well,
all
no.
of them.
I mean, like, I might steal that idea and write like a short story.
Oh, and then
run an adventure
I mean,
based on the short story, and then let you guys read it
the short
afterwards.
story? That'd be
That
cool.
sounds like a lot of fun to flex like your
Your
writing
writing
muscles.
muscles, yeah.
Jinx.
You owe me a Coke.
From now on, every time we say the same thing at the same time, we're going to drink. I just made that rule up right now, so here we go.
You're only doing that because you really like this
I
beer.
really like this beer. All right. No, that's a great idea, actually. Because we never played through any of the dime novels when I was playing Deadlands. I don't think we did.
Did we didn't do Night Train or anything with you?
Nope, I have I
Holy
have
buckets.
never played Night Train, Worms. I assume the Tick one is a dime novel, or
No, I don't think there was any with the Prairie Ticks.
Okay.
I'd have to look through the collection of them. I mean, I basically have every Deadlands book in existence.
Yeah.
Well, except for
the classic
all the
ones.
classic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, Savage Worlds is Savage. A lot of people like Savage Worlds.
I do. Well, I do have the Savage Worlds Deadlands core book. I just don't have a lot of the supplements to it
Oh,
because
yeah.
we just really haven't played a lot of Deadlands.
As someone who likes the randomness of drawing the cards and the more crunchy rules,
I do.
I do like classic more.
I prefer classic.
But that could be
Sorry,
we could be Deadlands grognards. I think might be the case
that might-
because the Savage Worlds one is a lot more popular.
Yeah, it is, but I like classic better. But yeah, the dime novels was kind of the similar thing you're talking about Dragonlance in the sense that they novelized, if tiny short story novels, the adventures, and then also gave you the actual material to play through them with your characters, which was a pretty cool feature.
Nice. Also, this was not planned, but that segues right into the next news topic.
Nice.
So, speaking of novels, well, not that there isn't already multiple movies and a comic and other stuff about it, but you may have heard of, and we've talked about it before, Alien, as in the Alien franchise, and how Free League Publishing publishes the actual licensed Alien RPG. But now, I think by the time this episode airs, it'll be out. There is going to be a book called Alien Colony War, based on Alien, but based on the Alien game by Free League Publishing.
Okay.
And that comes out, I want to say, according to the Amazon link I've got right here, it comes out April 19th.
So it's a novel based on the game that is based on the movie series.
yeah.
Okay. Just I'm
By
following
an
the thread.
author named David Barnett. It is an original novel, but it's called Alien Colony War, and it might be similar, where perhaps, and you could read this novel and then run an Alien RPG adventure based off of it, which sounds like a lot of fun. But for those who like Alien or the Alien game, just keep your eyes peeled, because this is close enough. Anytime there's fictionalization or novelization of game-related content, I'm probably going to talk about it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, reading and Like, I feel like most people that do tabletop games do some amount of reading.
Speaking of reading, did you know there was once upon a time I want to say a Wheel of... You're familiar with the Wheel of Time.
I mean, I've never read it, nor have I seen the show, but I am familiar with its
existence.
Yes.
Apparently, one time there was a Wheel of Time tabletop, too.
I think most things that have become popular enough, especially in the kind of fantasy genre, end up finding their way into the tabletop world.
It's pretty easy to use a more generic system. Well, I don't want people to get the idea, for those that are unfamiliar with more generic systems, that generic is a bad word, because it's not. A system can be quote-unquote generic and fill a really good void.
Typically, when we refer to a generic system, we're talking about a system that has a wide enough usage that you could use it for a lot of different kinds of settings, or a lot of different
GURPS or Fate or things, or Genesis or things like that.
Savage Worlds.
But I'm pretty sure Savage Worlds by design. I'm pretty sure, like, for example, the Dresden Files has an RPG, and I think it's based on the Fate system. Let's see. Oh, all right. So that's it for Alien Colony War. But I am going to rant now.
All right, go ahead.
So we talked about last episode how there is WizKids Frameworks, which is a line of on-sprue polystyrene plastic miniatures, and I would like to talk about the price point. I was unable to, through my... I didn't think about it until after they're already sold out and there's no back order. I went to my local guy, my local comic book store, my friendly local game shop, and asked, hey, can you get me any of these WizKids Frameworks? I just like the box of orcs. And this is me saying this before having done any research at all into the subject. I was just like, oh, can you get me the box of orcs? I'd like to see the quality of the miniatures. I didn't know the price point. I had not looked up what the other options were. I just knew there was a box of orcs. And honestly, I like to paint orcs. I think orcs are one of my favorite, like, humanoid monsters. It's one of my favorite fantasy miniature to paint is orcs. It's I'd say one of my best pieces for my mid-level novice accomplishment is a cool orc. He's like jumping in midair with a big great axe. But anyway, WizKids, for the purposes of officially licensed D&D miniatures, I believe there's a Beholder as well. I think there's a Baylor. A Baylor being a big, scary demon, totally not a ripoff of the Balrog. And by that I mean it is a ripoff of the Balrog until the Tolkien people came after TSR back in the 80s or 70s or whatever. But I didn't know anything about it, couldn't get a hold of one, and then I saw a video on YouTube by Goobertown Hobbies. Is a miniature painting themed YouTube channel, which I watch pretty much every video that comes out.
Unboxing video?
It was essentially a review of the WizKids Frameworks.
Okay.
And Goobertown Hobbies is a very chill dude. He's very cool, understanding, and patient. But me, on the other hand, I'm going to get angry about this. Because this box of orcs, the price per model is more than Games Workshop's orcs. I know the look on... I don't know if you're familiar with Games Workshop, but Games Workshop is the company that makes Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy, and Warhammer 40,000. They have incredibly high-quality miniatures.
That are incredibly expensive.
That are... Well, they are on the higher side of cost. And don't get me wrong, they have an entire team of talented artists behind that plastic. But just the amount of money per orc that you get in the WizKids box...
Like, how much was it per mini?
Okay, so
roughly.
There are 7 orcs in that box. The sprues, we're gonna have the description of of Goobertown Hobbies review video below. So if you want more information, he covers it in greater detail. But I'll summarize it here. There are 7 orcs in that box, right, on sprue, and I think most of them have like 2 different options for head and arm. Mm-hmm. However, there's only 5 different orcs. 2 of them are repeats in the box, and it costs $50.
Holy crap!
So that's like $7 and some cents per
mini.
orc. Okay, so you think about a 28 millimeter scale orc. Viewers at home, if you're familiar with miniatures, just think about your standard orc miniature that you have seen. Yeah. All right, now think about how a kobold exists as being shorter than an orc.
Yeah, less
right?
plastic.
And don't get me wrong. In your overhead, the plastic is negligible compared to the cost of hiring your talent to do the designs and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But There are 7 kobolds for $50 in the WizKids Frameworks line. You get a box of 7 sprues of kobolds for $50. 7 kobolds. Let that sink in. The same price as 7 orcs. They're almost like half the height.
Well, and here's the thing. I don't, like, in a lot of ways, I don't know how companies are going to be able to keep doing that with 3D printing as it becomes more popular, because you've done it before. You can go out and get on subscription services where you will get 80 some minis for $15.
Oh yeah,
like if you can print them, the STL files.
The STL files,
and
you don't get physical minis. No, you get the STL files to print at home.
But think about this for a minute. If you're the kind of game master that wants to make like you don't want to use tokens, you really want to like lean heavily into the imagery. So you want to be able to have miniatures for every character on a battle map. Okay, it is at that point when you're looking at costs like these WizKids costs, you would be better off to go buy a resin printer.
Oh yeah,
for a couple of $100, and then to get subscription services or just even to get the subscriptions right away. Just monitor some of these subscription services.
That's what I do.
And just wait. Oh, next month they've got an orc collection coming out. Cool. I'm going to sub this month for $15. I'm going to get orcs. I'm going to get orc vehicles and or weapons and terrain, and you're going to get orc tents.
Warg riders.
Yeah, warg riders, and it's $15.
I have a laundry list of my favorite STL Patreons, and if anyone's interested, and I could, let us know.
We could let you in on that. But I mean, I've got a few of them. And stuff like that.
Archvillain Games, Lord of the Print, Titan Forge, Artisan Guild.
And I mean, if you're talking long-term investment, at that point, you're better off to buy a 3D printer, because to be honest with you, operating a 3D printer is not that expensive. I mean, you're looking at, 30 to 50 cents a mini, probably.
Oh, yeah.
If you're using high-quality resin.
In the cost of resin. Now, if you're going to talk about effort, there is effort to learn how to work the machine, make sure it's calibrated, make sure you're not grinding your plate into the LCD screen.
But it's not that bad. I mean, I've managed to learn to operate 2 separate 3D printers effectively in very little time. You can get YouTube videos that teach you how to calibrate these things. And to be honest with you, the resin printers are easier to calibrate than the filament ones.
There are hero miniatures, which are pretty cool and have a lot of options, and they're about $15, which is a lot more acceptable compared to the kobolds. Because if you look at like commander units in the Games Workshop line,
they're
some
really
of those commanders,
detailed, really neat-looking dudes.
Yeah, some of those commanders can be like $20, $30. So for the hero characters, it seems pretty worth it. And in that link, you go watch Goobertown Hobby's video, he'll say the same thing.
Yeah.
The heroes are worth it. The 7 kobolds for $50, not worth it. So I'm kind of curious if the price point will continue.
Well, let's see.
Anyway, if we could keep going about this for the remainder of the episode, but we have other stuff to talk about, right?
Absolutely.
I want to get to this delicious beer. Why don't you tell us what we're drinking today?
Just so you know, he was hugging the bottle earlier.
You don't need to tell them that.
Sure I do. Okay, so what we are drinking today is a limited release Boulevard Chocolate Ale. Now, Boulevard Brewing is out of Kansas City. I've been to the brewery. Me and my wife went and toured the place. The tour is worth it. But this is a legitimate chocolate ale, and it is good. It is really good. The beer, being an ale, is a little bit milder. The chocolate flavors come in real well, and unlike a lot of stouts, and we all know if you've been paying attention that I'm a big fan of stouts, because this is just a chocolate ale, the chocolate comes out really well. There's not the coffee notes in there that are kind of helping to push it along, because it doesn't need it. I mean, the chocolate flavor on top of the ale is just good.
Well, and I because of tabletop games, I have done a little bit of research into recently how beer is made, and they malt the grain.
Yep.
Right. So between the chocolate and the malting of the ingredients, it tastes like a chocolate malt.
It kind of does. It does.
You drink this beer, it tastes like the ale version of a chocolate malt straight out of the bottle. It's amazing.
It's like the hard milkshakes at Zombie Burger.
Yeah, exactly. If they're by some virtue, any of you tabletop nerds that work at Boulevard Brewing hear this podcast, which is a very small chance at the current level of our popularity.
This shouldn't be a limited release.
This
should be a year-round beer.
Year-round, yeah. Or at least guarantee it every cold season.
Yeah,
right?
no doubt.
I want to know that this is coming back.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've even got the producers drinking this right now.
Yeah,
we're all sitting here drinking this. And
yeah,
they don't always drink beer with us, but they're enjoying it.
Ideally, if we love it this much, other people will too, and make such demands.
Yeah, absolutely. Get you some of this.
So yeah, saddle up to the bar and have Nero, today's bartender, get you a chocolate ale from Boulevard Brewing. If you are not of the appropriate drinking age, that's okay. It'll happen someday. Don't rush into it. Take your time. It'll happen. Now let's talk about the. I want to talk to you today and get your opinion, and then share those opinions with our lovely viewers about making quests.
Okay.
And kind of how to fit different types of quests into different genres. We can talk about some sci-fi stuff too, maybe, but I primarily want to focus on the objectives that you put in front of your players for different subgenres of fantasy.
Okay.
So, for starters, let's talk about the fact that there are different subgenres of fantasy and kind of what that means and examples of them. So let's start with high fantasy. When I say high fantasy, what do you think of?
I think very high levels of magic, very, very over the top as far as the fantasy elements. I mean, you're going to have, ley lines where magic shoots out of the ground. Dragons are going to be not only a relatively common thing, an incredibly well-known thing. Like, people the world over in a high fantasy setting know that dragons exist and fear them.
Right. So I will the ultimate example in literary works of high fantasy is the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And another important thing to note about high fantasy is that in terms of fiction, it usually involves a grand quest where the world is in trouble. A journey. There's a journey, if you will. But usually in high fantasy, you've got whether or not magic is prevalent. Because, in Lord of the Rings, there's 5 wizards?
Yeah.
Or something like that?
Magic is prevalent in the sense that people know what it is, but it's not prevalent in the sense that everybody can do it.
Right, whereas in Forgotten Realms, you've got...
half of the classes are magic. Maybe more than half of them are magically active.
Yeah, there's magically... Yeah, there's so many... You've got entire academies and huge metropolises of magi doing all sorts of crazy stuff with magic. Eberron is incredibly high magic, where every schmo on the street knows like a cantrip or two, practically. But... basically, the difference between the two big ones are high fantasy and swords and sorcery. And the big difference is kind of the scale of the story that you're telling. So in high fantasy, you're running your big Critical Role campaign of Season 1 where you've got to save the world. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know the story of Seasons 2 and 3. Season 3 is currently airing.
I haven't watched Season 2
I'm just using it as an example. High fantasy means high stakes. If the player heroes fail, bad things are going to happen. We didn't talk about recent happenings, which is incredibly relevant to high fantasy.
That's true. That was the thing we were going to talk about is our high fantasy campaign.
Yeah, the Victor Finder campaign, which we're using Pathfinder 2 for. Why don't you tell me, from your perspective, what happened in the last session of Pathfinder that we played?
I'll be honest, I really enjoyed the last session, mostly because Aram got his way.
Okay, how did Aram get his way?
So as we talked about before the last time we'd mentioned this, we were going to see a pirate queen who was the enemy of our enemy, essentially.
Yep.
Well, little backstory for you guys as far as this pirate queen has been a part of this campaign for pretty much since the beginning. She had a ship docked in the initial starting town that we were in, and the bard in our party at the time, who was the current leader of our guild, had slept with this pirate queen, siring a child.
This is like 4.5 years ago.
This is a very long time ago.
This is a campaign long in the works.
Well, consequently, after the bard had died due to an invisible air elemental assassin?
Correct, yes.
Okay, good. I did remember that right.
Yep.
We had come to discover that this bard, and I don't know if the bard even knew it, was the heir to one of the major kingdoms that was at war in the setting.
For those of you who are familiar with the Forgotten Realms, this
Malekith.
made-up kingdom is at war with Cormyr.
Yep, Malekith.
Yep.
We had found out that this bard, Resh, was the actual heir to the throne of Malekith.
Yep.
And that he was deliberately assassinated by, drumroll please, Victor the Big Bad Evil Guy.
Yes, Victor the Big Bad Evil Guy. So in the current iteration of our current running campaign, which is high fantasy, you as the Brotherhood, reformed, have kind of rendezvoused with this pirate queen once again, essentially,
Yep.
right? So you guys had a feast with her, right?
Yep.
So, and how did you, like, from Aram's perspective, how did that go?
Well, we made contact, and we were having this feast, and she has this little kid running around. A blue dragon shows up and then transforms into human form because he wants to pitch to her an alliance with Victor. This blue dragon works for Victor.
The big bad evil guy.
The big bad evil guy. But what the dragon didn't know was that I knew that that her child was actually now the last living heir to the throne of Malekith. So basically, he offered her Victor's assistance, and I offered her a better deal. The better deal was I have connections in Cormyr, which comes through some of the other characters that we've played in the campaign, but the Brotherhood has connections in Cormyr. That I might be able to leverage Cormyr's help in basically getting her child onto the throne if she rejected Victor's offer outright. The dragon was none too happy about this.
Oh, of course not. As dragons are often to be when they don't get their way.
But I was personally delighted about the entire thing because, as has been established, Aram is a bit of a manipulator and he's a bit of a knowledge hoarder. You know, he likes to know things and he likes to use those things to get what he wants.
He fits the archetype of a spy master.
He does very well. And so for him, he's been keeping this knowledge about the Resh and this kid and the Cormyr thing, or not Cormyr, the Malekith thing, kind of in his pocket because he didn't really have a practical use for it until now. And then all of a sudden, we've got her. So what she wants us to do is to assist her in taking down this other pirate lord, who I believe is currently guarding the entrance to a hoard of treasure and magical items that belong to her father. She's very big into legacy. Her father's legacy is somewhere in the Nilanther Isles where we're hanging out, and she wants it because she believes she's entitled to it because it's her family legacy.
It is her birthright, dang it.
Oh, it is her birthright. And when I found out how big she was into this whole birthright thing, I decided that I was going to mention her child's birthright to her. And
which was news to her.
Which was news to her because she slept with this bard without realizing, because I'm not, like, I don't know this, and I don't know that you're going to tell me it. I don't even know that Resh knew.
You don't know.
I don't know.
You don't
But
know.
what I do know is that after Resh died, we all found out, and I don't know how many of the rest of the party squirreled that information away in their gray matter, but I did. Aram most assuredly did. So yeah, I basically used her desire for legacy to offer our help to assist her in getting her father's legacy, and our help and our connections in Cormyr to attempt to seat her son eventually in the throne of Malekith, which is a good thing because the big bad evil guy is actually engineering a war between those two nations for his own ends. If I can put an end to that war, that will also be funny. If you guys don't remember the story about it, my warlock was actually in captivity and tortured for several years by this big bad evil guy, kind of in the middle of our campaign. So sticking it in his craws is on my list of things to do.
So basically, would you say that campaign is high fantasy, and
Yeah,
why?
Well, let's see. We've got Hydras. Half of our characters are all into magic. We have fought how many dragons now?
Well, what are the stakes of this campaign?
Oh yeah.
What happens if the party fails?
I'm not 100% sure what his plan is, but I know it's bad.
Currently, the big bad evil guy has beef with demons, specifically the demon lord Grazit. So, to the point that he has allied with devils, because in the Forgotten Realms, demons and devils hate each other, and there's an eternal thing called the Blood War, where demons and devils are constantly fighting. And basically what's happened is, through one thing or another, he has orchestrated that the Blood War has started to creep into the Prime Material Plane.
Yep.
And basically, you've got the sense that if the party remains inactive and just lets the big bad evil guy do what he wants, bad things will happen. And the entirety of the world will be threatened.
Victor-pocalypse.
Victor-pocalypse, which is incredibly different to Swords and Sorcery. Swords and Sorcery is honestly how most campaigns start at the lower level.
Yeah, you're handling local problems. You maybe working with a village to deal with the kind of, they got a goblin problem or something like that, and then your low level party is cleaning out a mine that's been infested with some Guga that is
Some Guga.
that's giving the town fits and preventing them from doing their job.
Yeah.
It's very low stakes stuff.
Yeah, well, low stakes in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But powerful, adventurers in general. Adventuring is a deadly game, even at the low level, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the primary difference between high
Especially at
fantasy
the low level.
and swords and sorcery is kind of the stakes of the narrative, whereas high fantasy focuses on a great quest with the possibility of bad things happening to the entire world. Swords and sorcery mostly focuses on personal objectives on a smaller scale. Warhammer Fantasy role-playing usually involve. Well, don't get me wrong. There are things that are more high fantasy stories, but I think if I was going to run a system like that, it would focus around the characters and them just trying to survive as adventurers.
Oh, yeah.
But my question to you, let's start with swords and sorcery. What are some of your favorite types of swords and sorcery quests, and how do you start to build them as a game master?
My favorites, when it comes to sword and sorcery, kind of that low-end, low-level stuff, what I like is hijinks.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that's the kind of low-level stuff, and we started a little bit of this with our Pathfinder campaign before it turned into Pirate Finder, where we kind of had that heist.
Oh, yeah. You were planning
working
a heist to steal something from a nobleman's house in the rich district
Yeah,
of town.
we were basically employed by a thieves guild, and that portion of the campaign was very centered around this one city and this thieves guild boss that wanted to flex his muscle and remind some of the merchants that he was the guy in charge. Now, in the grand scheme of the world, what was going on here didn't really make much difference. Let's be realistic. We were screwing over a merchant at the behest of a thieves guild leader and stealing things. Basically, we stole something from him that he was going to give to his daughter as a gift on her Sweet 16 party, if I remember right.
Yeah, that was
just
basically it.
so that the leader of the thieves guild could show up to the party and present her with the gift as a flex against the old man. That was pretty much what we did. Again, this was very low stakes in the grand scheme of the whole world, but it was so much fun. I in a lot of ways, I love the epic feel of the high fantasy, but I almost derive more enjoyment from the low-level swords and sorcery stuff.
Oh, I think that a lot of people might, actually, because it gets a lot more personal to the characters, right? You can really dial in on all the player characters' desires. Swords and sorcery is really good for if you want to run a more sandbox game. It's going to kind of naturally be driven towards that. An example, so if we're going to use Lord of the Rings as an example for high fantasy, the Elric novels by Michael Moorcock are more swords and sorcery. I've only gotten a little bit into it, but I think a lot of grimdark stuff. Well, actually, that might be a bad thing to say, because the Black Company actually is kind of high fantasy, even though it's grimdark. But my point being that you've got these more personal stories where it's more about the characters, what revolving around them, local problems. The world, if the world is not threatened, but that almost sometimes makes it more interesting, right? So you've got your hijinks is what you say you like. So from a game master perspective, how would you go about putting together something like that? Because for me, I start with number one is the patron. You've got to find a way to give the quest to the players and entice them. So if you were, Lance, going to run a hijinks like that, mechanically and narratively, to try and dangle fish hooks in front of the players, what do you do and what do you think about?
Well, I think, and this is probably a bias on my part because of the fact that I started with Shadowrun, and Shadowrun is almost always just a heist of some persuasion. It is a group of people being hired by somebody to take something from somebody else, or to sneak into a place and destroy something belonging to somebody else, to one party or the other's benefit or detriment. So for me, the first thing you want to think about is the kind of the patron, or the Shadowrun calls it the Johnson, the guy that's hiring you,
right?
And what their motivations are, because sometimes that motivation is going to lead to you being stabbed your players being stabbed in their characters being stabbed in the back.
No, not your play.
Don't stab your players, please. Whatever you do not stab your players. That's a felony. Don't do it. But sometimes, in a situation like that, the characters are a loose end.
Oh, yeah.
So from the beginning, if you're thinking from that patron's perspective, not only are you thinking about how to get these people to do the thing that you want to do, you're also thinking about how to get rid of them at the end of it all, or to at least, neutralize any possibility that they could become a threat. I also like to design those in a much more sandbox sense of the word than I kind of do. If you're doing a high fantasy campaign that's a journey, you don't want to railroad them, but you do kind of have to have almost a plot point kind of thing where
there really is kind of it's baked into the recipe, right?
Mm-hmm.
High fantasy is going to be less sandbox. Swords and sorcery is going to be more baddie of the week, kind of.
Yeah. But I mean, like when you're talking about a heist situation, since that's the example, I'm going to have the guy that wants it and his motivations, the guy that has it and his motivations, and then I'm going to have the object, and then everything else builds around that. Like what kind of security measures are going to be in place, what kind of things are going to get in the player's way. But other than that, I'm going to let them figure it out.
Okay.
Like I want it to be like I want them to come up with the plan. And that does require a bit of improvisation on your part, because they're going to come up with ideas that you didn't even think of, because you're probably going to have a half dozen different possible routes they could take.
That's one of those situations where one of the players comes up with an idea,
mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh, maybe so-and-so is the person behind all of this, and you didn't think of that. And of course you don't tell your players, but behind the screen you think, wow, that's a really good idea. I'm going to run with that.
I'm going to admit to it right now. Sometimes my players will float an idea at the table that I hadn't thought of.
Rather than fudging dice, you fudge the story.
Yeah, I'm like, that is a way better plot line than what I came up with. I like it. And you know what? I think that's a win for everybody, because you get a better story as a GM to put together because the player kind of inadvertently assisted you. But on another level, that particular player gets the I told you so at the end.
Oh, yeah.
They get to tell everybody, see, I told you this was what this guy was up to.
I knew it! Ha ha!
And, you don't tell them that, because at the end of the day, you didn't plan it that way. They gave you the idea, and you used it.
Yeah, one of the players gets the parlor scene from an investigative story.
Exactly.
Where the detective ropes together all the clues and tells everybody how it is.
What you didn't realize is that you actually took their idea and built backwards from it. But that's okay. Listen, as a GM at the end of the day, if everybody at the table's having a good time, then it doesn't matter how you got there.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, that is like priority one is just making sure everybody has a good time. Everything else is just a vehicle to get you there.
So with Swords and Sorcery, we've got more personal stories, or I would say the stakes are smaller, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to make high fantasy, it does really help to keep a player's interest by still roping their backstory into it somehow.
Oh yeah, everybody should get their 15 minutes.
Ideally, if you're going to play a high fantasy story where all the players are trying to stop the apocalypse, you want the players to be invested. Whether you have just asked them, hey, you're going to be playing heroes. Make characters that want to save the day, or somehow rope their character's backstory into the bad guys' efforts and machinations. So, like, for example, let's talk about Aram and his mother.
Okay, yeah, that is a good one. Okay, so Aram didn't really know his mother growing up.
Aram being Lance's warlock in our Forgotten Realms campaign.
Yep. He didn't really know his mother growing up. His dad was kind of a douche. That involved a lot of cult things, and part of the reason that
his dad made him unknowingly swear fealty to an outer god.
Yeah,
as a 9-year-old.
That's the thing that happened. Great parenting going on there.
That's both high fantasy and grimdark.
It's pretty edgy too. I mean, Aram's kind of the edgelord of the group. So.
Oh yeah, but a cooperative edgelord.
He is a cooperative edgelord. He probably has more loyalty to the group than most of the other players. He just tends to be the guy that kind of pushes the group's motivations from behind the scenes using somewhat questionable means.
Tell me about Aram's mom.
Okay, so Aram's mother, whom he didn't particularly know well, turns out that old Victor decided to use her as a...
Well, I think in the backstory she died in childbirth.
Yeah, she
right?
did.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't know her. But Well, Victor decided to, for one reason or another that I still haven't discerned. God, I couldn't even get to the bottom of that. Decided to use her as a Death Knight. Is that what they're
Essentially, yeah. He resurrected her as a Death Knight, which in classical D&D, a Death Knight is created by essentially an anti-paladin, or like a paladin who's forsaken their oaths and has much regret dying. Someone who basically an oathbreaker paladin coming back alive as a type of unholy revenant kind of thing. But Victor Cromwell, the big bad evil guy, because you're the game master and because you can make up whatever you want as long as you kind of make it believable in the setting, he found a ritual that you can use anyone to create a Death Knight, assuming that they have enough negative emotions tied to their death.
See, and this is something that it isn't even occurring to me until now why I haven't invested more time in figuring this out. Because did he resurrect her before his first encounter with Aram and it's just happenstance? Did Victor have some association with the family before Aram slaughtered the entire cult by himself? Or is this all like Victor making a big dick move because he's mad at Aram about something? Like, because she's been around for a while, but I mean, we've been kind of peeing in Victor's Cheerios for a while too. So I mean, like, I could totally see him like being that guy. He's like, oh, you want to be a jerk? All right, well, now I'm gonna resurrect your mom.
Yep, it resurrected the mom.
But I like the drama that, I mean, this is kind of a tangent, but I like the drama that it causes because you can tell that she hates having to fight Aram.
Oh, yeah.
Like, tears of blood, literally, like, in one of the encounters that she had when she was trying to fight us. She was actually avoiding directly attacking him and attacking his friends instead.
Oh, yeah. The one sentence point here is use your player's backstory to keep them interested in the larger stakes of the world. We've got Lance's character, Aram, who, sure, he thinks that Victor is a bad guy, but there are tons of, like, heroes in the Forgotten Realms. Why does it fall on to the Brotherhood to stop him?
Well, you know what? I mean, I know that you threw her in there, but you know what I think the bigger plot point that you threw in there to make sure that Aram is going to go after Victor relentlessly?
Why is that?
His kid.
Oh, yeah.
Because Aram had a little tryst with an Eladrin when they were in the Feywilds, and now he's got a 2-year-old. And preserving the entire cosmos against Victor to ensure the
prime material. It's kind of that Guardians of the Galaxy situation where it's like, I live in this universe.
Yeah, it's exactly it. For Aram, who would probably be a little bit nihilistic on his own, like, for him to understand now that he has a legacy and a child to protect, like, stopping Victor that's the only thing he does. Like, at this point, that's the only thing he's concerned about. Even his own life is irrelevant to that because he wants to protect his kid.
That's a good way to get your players invested in your world, whether you're running low fantasy, high fantasy, swords and sorcery, grim dark, heist stories, is once they are attached to certain NPCs, you have puppet strings at your command, essentially.
Well, and it doesn't hurt that out of everybody in our game group, I'm the only one with an actual kid.
Oh, yeah, that's
like,
true.
That was an easy string to pull for me because I have a son.
Yeah, you have actual empathy.
Yeah, I understand what fatherhood looks like because I'm doing it.
All right. You are doing fatherhood, so to have a character who is a father, now your real world emotions are easily pulled and projected onto your character.
So that's another thing, know your players. If you can think of an emotional button that would work on the player itself, you can probably push that button on the character and get some response.
Yeah, I would say that high fantasy at its base level, when you're making quests, is not that difficult as long as you have your players buy-in. If the players are invested in stopping the bad guy, all you have to do is give them information about the bad guy's goings-on, and they will go there and do it.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, some characters who are, like, inherently... Like Ulrich, for example. Ulrich is good, just by nature. You don't even need a hook to get him to stop Victor.
He is a paladin.
Yeah. All you have to do is tell Ulrich, Victor bad.
Yeah, Victor bad. Bad guy over there.
Yeah, and Ulrich will pursue him because it's in Ulrich's nature to stop evil.
Yeah.
Whereas Aram is a little more morally ambiguous.
I mean, when you've grown up with the whisperings of an eldritch nightmare being whispering into your dreams. And,
Yeah.
and you have to defend yourself against assassinating ex-cultists and things like that as you grow up. And also you've designed your character to be like a young Nathan Explosion, kind of.
Yeah, he's just not as ripped. He's small.
Yeah, he's like the Nathan Explosion's younger, skinny cousin.
That's been the jive. Dan drew my character at one point.
Yeah,
And he had a very Nathan Explosion vibe to his look.
One of our players is a pretty sweet artist, and that's how the character turned out on in color.
And I mean, it was correct. it was not outside of my view of him, but you know, I think when it comes to high fantasy, I mean, it's not to say that you can't do sword and sorcery with a leveled system, but I think that leveled systems tend to lend themselves better to high fantasy because as you grow and get to the god tier level,
you become capable of much greater feats.
Yeah, and
right?
I mean,
So,
like handling the problems of a single village at level 20 is. You can literally fart powerfully enough to kill, you know, whatever problems are bothering this village.
like Wario and Super Smash Bros.
Yeah, it's you know, at that point you eventually outlevel the problems of a smaller sword and sorcery campaign. I think.
And it's kind of inherent if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition or anything that's, you know, a branch of it, whether it be Pathfinder 2, Pathfinder 1, Old School Essentials. Well, I guess Old School Essentials is less so, because anything that's in Old School Renaissance is going to be more swords and sorcery just because of the lethality level of the system. But anything specifically D&D and Pathfinder, if you're playing levels 1 through 20, the lower levels are going to lean themselves towards swords and sorcery.
Yeah,
right?
the higher levels are going to lean themselves toward high fantasy.
In the Game Master's guide for D&D 5th edition, it even it tells you what tiers of play are at what level, right?
Yeah.
You know, at tier 3, you might be dealing with regional threats compared to level 1 where you're dealing with local town threats.
But you know, that's the thing is, I like that because, like, I think that most good hero stories start with humble beginnings.
Well, there's a thing, a lot of D&D campaigns end before level 10. It might be because people like swords and sorcery
So
more.
they don't want to get too much past that swords and sorcery level of stuff.
There's hacks for 5e, there's versions of other games where people will just stop leveling at like level 7 or 8 or something.
But you know, there's also expansions that go up to level 30.
Oh yeah, that's
Like
true.
fan-made expansions. This is nothing official, but I mean, there have been expansions done.
Mythic levels.
Mythic
is
levels. There you
usually
go.
what it's
Yeah.
called.
Where I mean, there's obviously a market out there too for the high fantasy stuff. I mean, if you're going up to level 30, because I mean, level 20 is pretty beefy in both Pathfinder and 5e. You start extending up to level 30 and getting into some of that stuff. It's like that's god slaying, literal god slaying tier.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Of power.
So with high fantasy, it's easy. You just have to have your players invested in the goal, and then you put objectives in front of them, and they will go through it like their quest. They will literally quest and tick off the objectives that have appeared on the top left side of their HUD. Right? They're like, oh, go to the mountain, slay the dragon, get the horde, proceed to stop the bad guy at the next location. But with swords and sorcery, I would say the way I like to start is with the patron. You know, think back to the way we started this campaign. It was, I think, inherent. I think more analytically these days about the way that I GM, whereas before in the early days I was just kind of winging it. And I think that I look back and I can recognize I did have a good sense of things. For starters, if you are going to have someone who's doling out the quests, I usually try to make that NPC likable. I like to have the person that is kind of the quest giver is someone that the party likes.
What was his name? The guy that ran Pharaoh or the
Darien Guildfive.
That Guild 5. That's right, because he was he reminded me of
J.K. Simmons.
J.K. Simmons. Yeah, he was a very J.K. Simmons dude.
Yeah, except instead of telling you to go out and get pictures of Spider-Man, it was to go slay wolves at a nearby cave.
And we did. And then there was wolves, and then there was was it a goblin cave that had where we found
Hobgoblins.
Yep, there you go, hobgoblins.
Yep, there was a goblin cave, or no, there were wolves harassing farms. You know, you've got your stereotypical early D&D kind of quests, which, you know, that was one of the blessings of our group, is that even though we were all avid tabletop role-playing gamers, none of us in our group, out of 6 people had much D&D experience.
That's true. I had 0, really.
So
So did Dan.
so at the start, I was able to just use the what might be considered passé tropes to people that have been playing since 1977.
Hey, stop it. I'm not that old.
But no, we had never played D&D, so I could just say, hey, there's wolves attacking a farm. There's goblins in a cave. And then you were able to go do that. Now, if you're playing with experienced players who are used to that sort of thing, there is just add a twist. You can take existing plot lines, take there's goblins in a cave, but maybe when you get there, the goblins are actually just trying to survive, right? You can just take existing quests and existing tropes. You can actually use the TV Tropes website. Have you ever been there?
I've never been there. No.
Okay, so there's a website, TV Tropes, where it's just a rabbit hole because it's links on links. They talk about things like, the 5-man squad, and then they compare it to like the group of badasses, and there's an entire article on unobtainium. It's just you can go through TV Tropes and talk about the different types of storylines and character archetypes and things like that, and then combine them, mesh them together. If you are starting over and you're low level again and you're running what would be considered swords and sorcery and you're not having any fresh ideas, if you're having writer's block and coming up with quests, take existing storylines that you've already done and just put a twist on it. I think one of the examples I've heard before is you're trying to go rescue the princess in the tower, except when you get there, she's the one who's keeping the dragon hostage, or something like that. You just take existing storylines and keep your players guessing.
So, this is kind of a weird opinion question, and obviously this is going to depend wildly on the types of characters that are in your campaign. But what do you think is harder to motivate the players for? Sword and sorcery or high fantasy?
I think it's easier to motivate players at the sword and sorcery level.
Really?
Because I would say so. And here's the thing: we're talking about motivations, not the implementation of goals. So if your players are not motivated to save the world, how do you get them to do it?
Yeah.
Right. Whereas at the sword and sorcery level, you don't necessarily, because it's more usually sandboxed, you don't need to have them be interested in everything. You have to put like 3 or 4 different ideas, and then the party will just latch onto one of them. It's like fishing, right?
Okay.
You throw out, you're fishing there in your little rowboat, and you've got 4 fishing poles right there.
You only got to catch one.
You're just waiting for one of them to twitch, right? So you just kind of look at, because almost always at the low level, players are going to want more money. It doesn't matter the game system you're playing in. In most game systems, they look at their piddly amount of gold or credits and they say, I don't have enough of this. So all you have to do is attach a price tag on a quest board. Right?
That's fair, because once you get up into that high level stuff, we have more money than God.
Yeah,
our guild we have so much money and resources. Like, money's never the issue for us anymore.
Very rarely in high, like,
it's the things that we are fighting are the issue. The catastrophic world-ending threats are the issue.
That's why I think it's really easy, because at low level you just attach a price tag. 100 golden dragons to the person who can bring me the head of the local hobgoblin boss. That gets players on it like flies on
Yeah. See, now I have a slightly differing opinion on
Okay,
this.
let's hear your opinion.
And here's the why. Okay. I think, and again, this depends on the group and the characters, and to a slight degree the players too. I think that having a major world-ending threat tends to motivate the players more, because kind of back to the Guardians of the Galaxy theory. I live here. On the other hand, if you've just got like a local crappy village with like local crappy village problems, if the players don't want to deal with it, they can just leave.
That's true.
Like, you can't leave the whole planet. I mean, I guess you could move to the Feywilds, I guess, and not deal with the Prime Material Plane. But for the most part, like, leaving is harder when you're talking about a world, or even worse, multi-world ending threat. Like, I don't know the full end game for Victor here, but I mean, it might involve more than just the Prime Material Plane. So there might not be any place we can go to hide. Whereas, if it's just, okay, the local governor is paying me to deal with goblins, but I don't really want to deal with goblins, so I can just move on to the next village and see what their problems are and see if those problems are better than the ones that are here.
That's true. So I think it comes down to is there much of a difference? And I say here, yes. There might be a difference between trying to guide the party and trying to motivate the party. Because when you say that, to me, that feels more like guiding the party. Because you're right. At the lower level, and you guys have done this to me before.
I know we have.
Where I have fleshed out a town. Unearthed comes to mind in our first Pathfinder foray, where I had fleshed out an entire town. The Brass Legion had showed up. There was all sorts of different things, and you guys were just like, well, let's leave.
Yeah, when the Treant invasion happened, we were like, let's just steal a boat and get the hell out of here.
Yeah, you gotta. So I would say that, yeah, you're right. In certain ways, it can be harder to motivate your players to stay.
I feel like there's a lot easier of an out in Sword and Sorcery. Like, in most campaigns, in a Sword and Sorcery campaign where everything's kind of the low level, if the players are like, yeah, I'm not trying to screw with all these, like, because, I mean, our Northgard campaign, basically the city got invaded by the Druids and the Treants and, like, the Viragard, yeah. Like, they came and just ravaged the city, and, like, this was, like, the second itineration of Bog, the first one having died in Jared's campaign.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, my first thought was, yeah, but we could just steal a boat and get out of here. Bog ain't trying to deal with these tree people.
Yeah, that's true. You guys were
just a bunch of angry hippies trying to destroy the town. I'm not here for that.
No, let's get the heck out of Dodge.
And we literally stole a ship and just sailed upriver with it.
And, well, part of your reason to leave was because Jared's character was being chased by the mage hunters.
That's true.
You're like, well, we don't need to deal with this guy.
Well, but
we
you
can
know,
just flee the town.
Well, but because that was the thing too, is you introduced the mage hunters. And Jared did everything he could to piss this guy off at every turn. And it got to the point where it was... Because the Mage Hunter was pretty content letting Jared live, as long as he kept doing what he was told.
Right.
And Jared did everything in his power to piss this dude off who could clearly kill him. And so we were like, well, we got a druid problem, we got a mage hunter problem, and there's a shipyard down that way, and a couple of us are career thieves. Let's just take a ship and just get the hell out of here.
So I would say that in Sword and Sorcery, it is easier to at least produce hooks. Right? You just say,
no, that's fair. You can throw a lot of things at players and give them something to do.
But you're right. It is much more unpredictable.
Yeah.
You can more reliably steer the group. Now, that's not necessarily... It's not railroading, because you still have to put things in front of the players for them to chase. But I would say that, yeah, I think in a sense you are absolutely correct from your point of view, because now that you bring that up, yeah, at the high level of play, when I create hooks, I almost reliably, like, I can expect you guys to act.
Well,
I can almost predict how most situations will turn out, whereas in Swords and Sorcery, I gotta be more improv ready.
Because in the high fantasy, you're like, if you guys don't do something about this, the world's gonna end.
Yeah.
So you can go back and lay around in your hamlet and, you know, drink until you're stupid, but at the end of the day, if you do nothing, you're still gonna die.
You know, with this chocolate ale, I might drink until I'm stupid.
I think we found his favorite beer on the show so far.
So far, I would say this is pretty good. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's heavy. You're going to feel pretty full if you chug a bunch of these. But, yeah, it's really awesome, this chocolate ale. Okay, so in summation, when you're making and forming quests, number one thing, try and buy into the player backstories. If your players, you know, most of the time, even if it's a couple notes, like for example, we're doing our test for our system tomorrow, and all you need to know about my guy is that he's kind of got a rivalry with his older brother, that he's going to try to earn more glory from the gods. That's enough of a hook that you can work with that. When your players are making their backstories, make sure you get something out of their backstory that you can use as a plot hook.
And I would add that is doubly important when you're talking about Sword and Sorcery.
Okay. Yeah,
because
it focuses more on the personal level.
Those low-level motivations are going to be the things that are going to draw. Even if you're doing like a campaign that is going to be high fantasy but starts out in Sword and Sorcery, you got to give these guys something to work with that their characters are going to care about. And it can't always be, I mean, okay, if you've got a lawful good paladin and there's a problem with goblin raids, it's a pretty safe bet the lawful good paladin is going to be motivated to stop them.
Oh, yeah.
On the other hand, if you have a chaotic neutral rogue who's really just in it for profit, then you better make sure you're offering enough money to get his attention.
Oh yeah.
There's got to be some motivation in there. Now, once you move up into that higher level stuff, where if you guys don't do this, the world comes to an end. Well, that's motivation in and of itself.
Yeah, that's true. And don't forget, game masters who are present, that if you are running and you are prepping for something that is maybe considered a tired trope, or you've done it before, take a classic trope and put a spin on it.
Add a little spice.
Yeah, maybe that little lawful good paladin is going to do something about those goblins, but those goblins are being forced to do violent things by a different overlord that has kind of blackmailed them into something. Why have they been blackmailed? I don't know. That's for you to figure out. It's your game. Own it.
That's right. Add a little sriracha.
Add a little sriracha to add a little sriracha to your game.
If you get a little tired trope, add a little sriracha to that thing.
You're not wrong. You can kind of add sriracha to whatever.
You can put
right?
sriracha on anything.
I mean, I'm tired of this meal. Well, just add sriracha.
It's easy.
All right, so don't forget to take everything we've said into account, or maybe you hate everything we've said. That's your opinion, man.
You can tell us about it in the comments or emails.
That's right. Tell us about it in the comments or emails. Nero is saying that it is last call, so on the closing note, I'm going to get another one of these beers, these chocolate ales, but
Delicious.
If you want to reach out to us, you can find us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That is the Record Button Production Group. You can also find the Record Button Production Group on YouTube. You can send that link to your buddies so they can listen to both this show, they can listen to our sister shows, Why Did I Write This, and Active Wasteland Radio, which is a Fallout theme. Yes, Fallout, as in the bombs dropped Fallout, a radio drama set in that universe. Those can be found there. We can also be listened to on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, anything like that. If you want to reach out to us, and I'm going to say this again, if you want to reach out to us, that is, you want to provide questions or feedback, you may do so. We will check the email at gmspeakeasyofficial@gmail.com.
He's going to keep doing that until you send us emails.
I'm going to do it. It's going to get more annoying until you keep sending me more emails and shut my ass up. So please email us more questions and things you'd like us to talk about. In the meantime, I hope you have enjoyed your time here at the Game Master Speakeasy, staying cozy near the ever-burning hearth. And I've been Cody.
And I'm Lance.
Join us again next time. Please get home safe.